everyone. Happy Halloween. This is Pam from Pam's Crafty Corner. Welcome back for another episode of Coffee, Crime, and Crafts. Because today is actually Halloween, I've decided to do something a little bit different for this week's episode. I picked a couple of crimes that are quite old and that they've become woven into the fabric of St. John's folklore as the stories of these crimes evolved into stories of restless spirits and hauntings. So grab your drink of choice and grab your craft of choice. This week I'm going to be working on a cross stitch. And settle in and join me for this episode. While discussing these events today, I'm going to be working on another cross-stitch piece. This is Arsenic and Old Lace. It's designed by the Little Stitcher on Etsy. I don't know if that's going to focus on that, but it's the Little Stitcher. There we go, on Etsy. It captures the details from a 1944 black and white movie, also called Arsenic and Old Lace, starring Cary Grant. He actually plays a character named Mortimer Brewster, who upon returning home on his wedding day discovers that his elderly aunts that raised him have been killing lonely travelers at their boarding house and burying them in the basement. They've been poisoning them by putting arsenic in their homemade elderberry wine. So obviously, I thought that this would be an appropriate piece to work on during today's Halloween episode. So I'm just going to work across the bottom of this gentleman's shirt while I'm talking here. And then I'm going to start his pants. I just have a few stitches to put in here on my way across, that's all. So this piece, I've shown it before in other videos. I've already stitched the two ants. And now I'm working on this gentleman in the chair. I'll just show you the section of the pattern. It's right here. So I'm going to be working on him. Okay. So I've got my coffee at the ready. Today I'm drinking a dark roast coffee from Have a Java, which is a local coffee company. And I'm going to enjoy that while there's no one in my house. And I can get some stitching done. So our first story today began in 1793. This is when Catherine Mandeville Snow was born in Harbor Grace, Newfoundland. Little did anyone know at that time that Catherine would leave a legacy as the last woman to be hanged in Newfoundland. It's quite a horrible legacy, if you ask me. So, Catherine developed a relationship with a man named John William Snow. And she took up residence with him, moving to a community called Salmon Cove. There, they lived together for a few years before finally marrying on October 30th, 1828. Okay, and that's the last stitch for there. So I ended that thread, and now I'm going to start a different color for his pants, and I've just rethreaded my needle. So as I was saying, Catherine met and moved in with John William Snow. They lived together for a while, and then they finally got married on October the 30th of 1828. During their time together, the couple had 7 children, but their relationship was not a good one. They were both unhappy and often fought. And Catherine was known to fight back, throwing things at John when their fights got out of hand. Catherine's cousin, Tobias Mandeville, saw firsthand how unhappy Catherine was, and the two of them grew very close, and Tobias was quite fond of her. It wasn't long until rumors spread that Catherine and Tobias were actually having an affair. On the night of August 31st, 1833, John Snow disappeared. Neighbors began to question what had become of John and speculated that he had been murdered. Just counting my stitches there, I have to be 7 past his shirt. So people started to speculate that John had actually been murdered. Magistrate Robert Pinson launched an investigation into John's disappearance. And it did not take long for them to discover an odd amount of dried blood at John's fishing stage. As many people might know, Newfoundland, the main source of income for a lot of families living in a small outport community, was fishing. And a fishing stage is typically a small building by the water with a wooden plank walkway or wharf attached to it, where fish could be cleaned and salted and dried. So although there was an amount of blood that was found at John's fishing stage, his body was not recovered. So Catherine and her cousin Tobias Mandeville were both implicated in John's murder, along with an Irishman by the name of Arthur Spring. Spring was actually an indentured servant of John Snow's. On hearing the news that they had been implicated in John's murder, Catherine fled on foot into the woods. But eventually, she turned herself into the courthouse in Harbor Grace. All 3 of the accused were questioned at length, and they provided confessions stating that John was murdered because Catherine wanted to get out of the hateful relationship and wanted to make way so that she and Tobias could get married. So John apparently had been shot as he was leaving his boat to go to his fishing stage on the night of August 31st. The 3 accused were transported to St. John's for trial, which took place on January the 10th, 1834. Despite the confessions, all 3 parties entered pleas of not guilty. Catherine and Tobias were represented by the same lawyer, George Henry Emerson. while Arthur Spring was represented by Brian Robinson. The Attorney General, acting as prosecution, told the all-male jury, "I can't prove which one fired the shot. Both were present for the murder. As to Catherine Snow, there is no direct or positive evidence of her guilt, but I have a chain of circumstantial evidence to prove her guilty." During the trial, it was discovered that Catherine was actually pregnant with her 8th child, which left some to question, was the pregnancy the result of her relationship with John, or was the child actually Tobias's? So the jury only had to deliberate for a very short time. They came back and returned a guilty verdict for all 3 accused. And the deliberations only took 30 minutes. 3 days later, on January the 13th, 1834, Tobias and Arthur were hanged for their crime. Catherine was, however, given a short reprieve by Governor Thomas John Cochrane, and she would instead be held in the St. John's jail until after her baby was born. During that time, many Newfoundlanders were determined that Catherine was not to hang. Many believed that she was not actually responsible for the murder. Catholic Bishop Michael Fleming began campaigning on behalf of Catherine. Her case aroused widespread controversy and many heated public debates. Alas, on July the 21st, 1834, as crowds gathered on Duckworth Street in downtown St. John's, Catherine walked out onto a platform from the 2nd-story window of the courthouse. When asked if she had any last words, Catherine stated, "I was a wretched woman, but I am as innocent of any participation in the crime of murder as an unborn child." Within minutes, the sentence was carried out and Catherine was hanged. It wasn't long after her body was buried that rumors began to circulate about a ghostly apparition being seen near the Catholic cemetery where her body was interred, and also in the area of the old courthouse, which actually was destroyed and rebuilt. It had been destroyed by a great fire, and it had been rebuilt now slightly to the west of the original location years later. In the 1950s, a pair of cleaning women at the courthouse reported seeing a woman wandering a hall at night. The same woman was also subsequently seen on the stairs of the courthouse several times later. Many believe it to be Catherine, and that her spirit is unable to rest peacefully. In April of 2012, a mock trial took place. It was staged to reenact the events of the original trial. A modern defense lawyer, Rosalind Sullivan, said that the evidence of an affair was too prejudicial and it was impossible to extricate it from the statements. So there was no way that Catherine could ever have received a fair trial back in 1834. After the evidence was presented at the modern reenactment and the lawyers had rested their case, the modern jury actually found Catherine to be not guilty. So moving right along, my stitching is not going too bad here. I hope that this is in focus because I can't really see where I have my camera placed, but I'm hoping you're seeing my stitching okay. Our next story is about the last fatal duel that occurred in St. John's in 1826. So this is another interesting story with a ghostly end. In March of 1826, the garrisons of Fort Townsend, which would have been in the vicinity of where the Rooms Museum is now in St. John's, and the garrison at Fort Williams, which would have been down on the corner where the current Sheraton Hotel stands. Both garrisons of these forts were quite full and crowded with many soldiers in 1826. To break up the monotony, many social events were often held, and two individuals in particular became known rivals. Captain Mark Rudkin of Fort Townsend was a member of the British Army, and Ensign John Philpott of Fort William was a member of the Royal Veteran Company. They would often throw insults at each other, and both had their eye on the same pretty Irish girl who was living in the little local village of Kitty Vitty, and they had both been competing for her affection. After many social events, the evenings would wind down with drinking and high-stakes card games in the private living quarters. On the night in question, John Philpott had been losing badly, and he had been drinking most of the evening. He began to quarrel with others that were at the event and was obviously angered by losing so much money. As the story goes, the last game of cards for the night saw several players drop out as the stakes got higher, and it came down to one last hand between Philpott and Rudkin. The pot on the table was a considerable amount of money, totaling £2, 8 shillings and 6 pence. I have no idea what that would be in today's terms. But apparently at the time in 1826, this was quite a big to-do. It was quite a high stakes hand. It was Rudkin's turn to deal the cards, and he ended up with a winning hand. Philpott could not believe that he had lost. He accused Rudkin of cheating and tried to seize the money from the table. But Rudkin forcibly took it back. Philpott threw a jug of water in Rudkin's face. And as Rudkin turned to leave, Philpott pursued him and kicked him hard in the back. Oh, I think I got my stitch in the wrong spot there. Came up in the wrong hole. Bear with me. There we go. I'm actually getting to the end of this thread, so I think I'm just going to work my way back here and tie this off and start a new thread. There we go. I like starting my, when I'm stitching with 2 strands, I like starting with a loop start because it makes it much easier. You don't need to worry about weaving in an end when you start. Although what you do have to worry about is you need to make sure you go down through the right hole, which I did not do. Of course, because that would make it too easy, right? Let's try this hole. Catch that loop with my needle. There we go. So where did we leave off? We left off that Philpott had thrown a jug of water in Rudkin's face, and then as Rudkin went to leave, he kicked Rudkin in the back. So, as retaliation, Captain Rudkin challenged Philpott to a duel the next morning to settle the matter, thinking, I guess, that he could put Philpott in his place once and for all. So, dueling in 1826 was not illegal, and as a matter of fact, the point of dueling was not always the death of one of the opponents. Often, if both people attended and fired their weapons, even if no one was injured, that was considered to be enough. The parties involved had shown strength of character just for attending and would often agree to let their disagreements lie. So the following morning, on March the 30th, 1826, both parties arrived at the field at the base of Robinson's Hill, which today is known as Fieldian Grounds. It's like a sporting area in St. John's. So they met on a field at the base of Robinson's Hill. And Rudkin, who had cooled down overnight, he offered to call off the whole thing. But Philpott was still looking for redemption. He was insistent that Rudkin had cheated the night before. So both men took their places at 48 paces apart. With pistols loaded, both men took aim and on the command of fire, shot their weapon. Rudkin, who was not interested in killing anyone, shot his pistol into the air. Philpott, however, fired his weapon directly at Rudkin, and the bullet grazed the collar of Rudkin's coat. Again, Rudkin suggested they let the matter rest. Both of them were obviously man enough, as they had shown up and had seen the duel through. But Philpott, he took Rudkin's act of firing his weapon into the air as another insult, and he demanded a second round. So their guns were reloaded, and the command of fire rang out once again. This time, however, Rudkin aimed true. His shot struck Philpott squarely in the chest below his outstretched arm, rendering him dead. Ensign John Philpott was given a military funeral and was buried on the grounds of the Anglican Cathedral on Church Hill. Captain Mark Rudkin was arrested and charged for the crime of murder, but several other officers who had been witness to the events testified on Rudkin's behalf at his trial, and on April the 17th, 1826, he was found not guilty. Not long after the events of that fateful morning of March 30th, several people began to report odd happenings near Robinson's Hill. Many people suggested that horses became skittish and often difficult to control as they approached that area. Some people even claimed to have seen a ghostly figure wearing a military-style coat with a prominent red stain on the breast of the jacket, wandering nearby streets. Lastly, I'm going to turn our attention to a set of 4 sisters. Now, these aren't just any 4 sisters. I'm actually referring to a set of identical houses that were built between 1893 and 1903, just at the turn of the century. And although no crime really takes place in this story, it is a good example of yet another one of those ghostly tales that have developed in the folklore of St. John's, just based on the backstory and the eeriness of the property itself. So located at numbers 31 to 37 Temperance Street in downtown St. John's, these houses were designed and built by Samuel Garrett, who was a prominent builder and stonemason. He's actually the man who is responsible for designing and building St. John's iconic Cabot Tower, which is located atop of Signal Hill. Garrett lived on Duckworth Street himself. He acquired property. Oh, do I have a knot? Just check the back. No, I do not. Okay. So he acquired property on Temperance Street and began designing and building 4 stone row houses, one for each of his 4 daughters, that were meant to be given to them on their wedding day. Construction on the houses began in 1893, but by 1897, Garrison started work on his famous tower at Signal Hill. The 4 sisters, as the stone row houses became known, were unique in design as well as in the materials that were used to build them. The houses are 3-story structures, although only 2 stories are visible from the outside. The first floor of each of the houses is below ground, an unusual feature at the time. And the houses were built directly into the bedrock cliff of the surrounding hillside. Each house originally had connecting interior doors, as well as a tunnel in the first level, thought to be intended for water supply from the nearby Kitty village. The exterior of the homes used surplus stone from the building of Cabot Tower, as well as from the demolition of St. George Hospital. The houses were built with exterior stone walls that are actually 2 feet thick, with an air gap between the stone and a wooden framework interior. This design provided insulation and protection to the wooden interior from rot or from damage. The homes had beautiful, ornate peaked dormers along the mansard roof, and Garrett personalized each home by choosing different decorative molding to frame each home's doorway, the entryways. These stone homes are actually one of the only remaining set of original stone buildings still standing in the area today. These 4 homes actually survived the fire of 1846, as well as the Great Fire of 1892. Finally, in 1901, Garrett's daughter, Loretta McFarlane, moved into number 35 Temperance Street. And his other daughter, Emily Dueling, took ownership of number 37 shortly thereafter. Unfortunately, the other 2 houses would not see Garrett's remaining 2 daughters take ownership. His daughter Eliza did not marry, and she continued to live at the main family home on Duckworth Street. And his daughter Mary died of a contagious disease at the young age of 24. Numbers 31 and 33 Temperance Street were rented out until later years when the grandchildren were old enough to marry and move in. The years went by, and many people reported seeing a light on in one of the homes, even though it was now vacant. People walked past and often thought they saw a young woman smiling at them from one of the windows. And she would sometimes wave at passers-by, but would disappear before they could wave back. A family rented one of the houses that had become vacant and reported their young daughter would often say there was a woman in her room. The parents would sometimes wake up to the sound of their daughter laughing and talking to someone, although there was no one else in the house. Rumors also circulated that a ghostly apparition of a woman had been seen to float through a room only to pass through the wall and reappear in the adjoining house. In later years, all 4 of the houses eventually became abandoned. The last living resident passed away in 1982, and the houses started to fall into disrepair. They have, however, been designated as heritage properties because of their historical significance to the city. And the current owners, there's been talk that they're actually working together now to restore the homes to their former glory. One can only hope that that happens for buildings that have been seen so much history and that are set in such a unique hillside in one of the oldest cities in North America. I am just about finished this gentleman's pants. And I have come to the end of my episode. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's a little bit different. A couple little stories of crimes that led to ghostly encounters later on. I'll be back to some sort of regular single crime in my next video. Please give my video a like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any upcoming content. I've been uploading videos every 2 weeks. If you want to help support my channel and the time it takes me to research and prepare each episode, feel free to check out the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description box. Happy Halloween, and until next time, stay safe and enjoy crafting.